Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy. Another game preview today. This episode will be focusing on the AFC West matchup between the Oakland Raiders and the Denver Broncos at Mile High Stadium this weekend. It's going to be a really key matchup. Both teams at 2-1 in a division that's looking like it's going to be pretty tough. Definitely going to be a game that's going to have an impact on the standings at the end of the year, you would have to suspect. As ever, I'm going to go through what I consider to be the key matchups, how I expect both teams to attack this game, before discussing how I think things end up. Start with the injury report, which is nice and clean for these two teams. Gary and Conley, Bradley Roby seem to be the two significant players that may miss this game. Both nickel corners, and both would be a loss to their team. But both teams going into the game reasonably healthy, so you can expect a pretty good matchup in that regard. We're going to start with the Broncos offensive matchup against the Raiders defense. And this has to start with the wide receivers for Denver. Still the star players in this offensive group. Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, one of the better pairings in the league. Of course, Sanders more the technician. I'm wondering how we're going to see the Raiders line up against them. I suspect we'll see David Amerson against Emmanuel Sanders, and probably Sean Smith, he's the bigger, more physical corner, lining up against Demaryius Thomas. Now, that matchup would terrify me if I was the Broncos. Smith has struggled at times in his tenure with the Raiders, especially running with guys downfield. So I would have to suspect with Thomas's ability, he's going to be most likely to get some help from Reggie Nelson over the top. That will free up Sanders. I think he'd have the beating of Amerson, so I think they're going to have to play him pretty much off him. So he's going to need to do a good job of ferrying Sanders on routes to a place where he's going to be able to get some help tackling him. Sanders is very elusive. Both of these guys are dangerous after the catch. It's going to be imperative for the Raiders to try and limit the yak in this game. At quarterback, we'll see Trevor Siemian, who struggled last week but has generally started the season pretty well. I think against this Raiders team, he's going to have the ability to bounce back and put up some significant numbers. The Raiders haven't generated as much pass rush as I would have expected at this point in the season. Generally, the defence has fared better than I would have expected. It's not been a particularly good group, but they've not been a disaster like I thought they may have heading into the year. But what you would have thought would be the strength, it's been the strength. It's just not been dominating. And frankly, the Broncos' offensive line have performed much better than I would have expected to this point. How healthy Garrett Bowles is and whether he even plays, that's another question mark in this one. But these edge rushers, I think, are going to be key. I can't see the Raiders holding up at the corner position. Those guys are going to be able to get open. They're going to have opportunities to make plays, and Siemian can get the ball there. So it's going to be on Mario Edwards, Khalil Mack and Bruce Irvin to bring the pressure. Now, I think they'll be able to do that. I don't think there's anybody as improved as the Broncos line has been that can deal with Khalil Mack. I expect him to be an absolute force in this game. Doing what he usually does against the run, which is just dominating that side of the field and setting the edge incredibly effectively. But Mario Edwards, him and Bruce Irvin, they both need to step up. I don't think they've started the season particularly well. One guy's not going to be enough. I think Siemian's mobile enough. He's decent enough in the pocket to somewhat narrow the impact that just Matt can have. They're going to need to be able to collapse the pocket to force this passing game to be a short one, because I don't trust their ability to defend the downfield pass against this team, and the Broncos are happy to throw the ball deep as a team. The interior is going to be a big deal. They've played pretty well thus far. Eddie Van Dos has been fantastic thus far in his young career. He's made a real impact. Struggled a bit last week, but that, the Washington offensive line is of a far higher standard than the Broncos. Expect him to do a pretty good job. Him and Mack, it's going to be on those two primarily, I think, to shut down this run game, which has been much, much improved for Denver, and I think it's one of the reasons they've been a pretty balanced, decent group offensively thus far. If you're the Broncos, you have to run away from Khalil Mack. I don't think you can challenge him too often. Teams have sometimes tried, and frankly, the success rate going to his side isn't great. So expect to see Van Dost lined up opposite Mac to try and strengthen the opposite side of the field, particularly where I expect to see Mario Edwards being given more of a free rein to rush the passer in this one. I think Van Dost will be there to try and shore up, hold the run there. I think they can get outside of Edwards. I think that's something they're going to have to try and do, because running up the middle of this Raiders team has been pretty tough sledding thus far. Van Dost does a good enough job stacking the line of scrimmage, and the other defensive tackles that have been rotating in have been doing a pretty good job there as well, and that allows Khalil Mack to also get involved in those plays. So I think running to the opposite side, that's going to be a key. It's not necessarily what Anderson does well, so maybe expect to see a bit of a split with Jamal Charles on some of those plays. Ronald Leary's going to have a big day. I think we're going to see some blitzing from this Raiders team, I think, to try and create some bad situations for Trevor Siemian in the hope of causing mistakes. If they've got good situations, I don't think Simeon's going to... I think he'll play a more conservative game after the bizarre decisions that were made last week. If they give him time, I think he's going to pick these guys apart. So I expect to see some blitzing. It will help slow down the run game, and it might force Siemian into some bad throws. Otherwise, I see this game being pretty difficult for the Raiders defensively. Cole Joseph is going to have to bring the wood, I think, on these two wideouts at some point in this game to try and strike some fear into them, because I don't like the matchups on the outside at all. The run game, I'm expecting the Raiders to do a pretty good job against that. What I think they need to do most effectively is try and keep everything contained, and that includes Siemian. I don't like this defense's ability to rein guys in once they get to the outside. They're not the most dynamically athletic group at linebacker. Irvin's a better pass rusher than he is a run defender, depending how they use him in this game. But they're going to have to try and keep things tight in the middle of the field, so expect maybe to see some wider formations from the defensive line. The ends playing out pretty wide, creating bigger lanes for the linebackers to get involved on the interior plays. Once again, Khalil Mack, he'll shut down the one side. The opposite side with Edwards, I think that's going to be a key area for the Broncos to try and attack. If they can have some success in the run game, of course they'll look to open things up with a bit of a play action passing game, and that's where I'd worry about this Raiders team. They have been prone to biting on some plays that, they've got a lot of young guys, and I think they can be misdirected quite effectively. As a result, I'm thinking this is the game where Jamal Charles will probably see the most significant amount of snaps, because I think he can help this team out in the passing game. I think he's a better pass blocker than CJ Anderson at this point, and I think the Broncos are going to have to go into this one being pretty flexible, adjusting to where they see Mac on the field and calling plays appropriately. I think some misdirection type plays could certainly be very, very effective in trying to get him to slow down. Maybe throw some screens in his direction. He's pretty effective against them, but I think you have to do it just to try and get him to have to think about what he's doing rather than just sort of pinning his ears back, setting the edge and rushing the passer. As a result of that run game, I think the Broncos are going to be pretty aggressive in this one. While I think they're going to rein it in, I still think they're going to take their shots down the field. I think they're going to come out in this game looking to establish that run, see how much success they can have with it. And if so, I'm expecting them to go to the play action well early and often, try and get some double moves down the field, particularly with Sanders, who's an exceptional route runner. Get some deep crossing routes going. If they can do that, I think they'll have a lot of success. I don't trust this linebacking group's ability to help out too much in coverage. The safety play has been okay, but that's where I think the Broncos can have the most success. Bootlegs, that kind of thing, I think can keep the pocket moving, minimise the effect of that pass rush. I don't think they're going to be able to block the Raiders incredibly effectively, so I think they're going to have to be a little bit creative in their usage of the offensive line, possibly use some more tight ends in blocking, possibly not send the running back out on routes as much. If they can keep Siemian clean, I think he'll be able to take some of those shots, he'll be effective with them, and I think that will help set up a bit of an interior running game, helping this team bleed the clock a little bit more effectively than they perhaps would look to otherwise, because this Raiders team is pretty soft in the secondary. I'm still pretty convinced of that, even if it's not necessarily shown up as much as I would have expected at this point in the season. If you're the Raiders, I think you've got to have a plan for dealing with these receivers. I outlined earlier how I feel they're going to do this, but I think it's got to... Sean Smith is going to have to roll back the years, I think, play some pretty effective bump and run coverage on Demaryius Thomas. Once Thomas gets moving, I don't like his ability to mirror him at all. And considering how well the Broncos have generally looked at offensively running the ball, I don't know if they can afford to have that shade over the top on every single play. So I think they're going to have to use the bump and run with the shade sometimes, but they're going to have to leave him in man every now and then. It's going to have to be disguised, I think. Kyle Joseph is going to have to help out in the box, because I do think that the Broncos are going to be able to have some success finding some gaps on the outside. I think Joseph is the X factor there. I think he's going to have to be all over the field. He's the most important player to me for the Raiders to have success in this game. If he has a really big game, then I think they can maybe get some picks, have some impact plays, and shut down this run game. Expecting to see blitzing from the Raiders. I think they're not gonna trust their secondary to hold up against these guys. And outside of Mack, I'm not sure they're too confident they'll be able to win enough one-on-ones to slow down this Broncos offense. So I think they're going to have to try and blitz to make them one-dimensional, make them pass the ball quickly, and try and hope to capitalise on some indecision and possibly some inaccurate throws under pressure. Because if they play them straight up, I think the Broncos offense has too much talent for the Raiders at this point in time. On the other side of the field, this is a really good matchup. The Raiders' passing attack has been somewhat disappointing thus far this season. Amari Cooper's not really got going. He's had a few drops. Crabtree seems to make either catches in bunches or have very little impact. He feels quite streaky. And Carr, I think teams... Last year, I've said he's been a very dinky-dunk type quarterback, or he was last year. And I think teams have adjusted to that. I think they're forcing him to try and make some more difficult throws this season. And frankly, the receivers have let him down a little bit, and they've not been up to the challenge. And I still think Carr's naturally quite conservative, not taking quite enough chances for this team to be really successful in the passing game thus far. And we saw last week, once you take away that run game, they really do struggle to generate too much offense. So, going to be a tough matchup. This Broncos defense is absolutely legitimate this year, having shored up the run game. It's a tough one for the Raiders. After struggling against the Redskins last week, it's hard to imagine, considering how well Chris Harris and Aqib Talib have started this season, them being able to get too much success. Don't expect anything exotic from the Broncos. We know what they're going to do. They're going to line those two up. Talib's going to be an exclusively man, and you'd think they'll trust. And I'm expecting to see Talib up against Crabtree in this one, and Cooper up against Chris Harris. Going to be a tough one for those Raiders guys. I really do think this corner group's exceptional, especially if Roby plays. I like the Broncos matchups there. I think that frees up the safeties to play against the run, and the offensive line was massively underwhelming last week. I do think they can handle this group. DeMarco Pico, I think, will get overwhelmed, as well as he's played surprisingly well thus far this season. I think he should be overwhelmed by the talent on the Raiders interior. And then they'll be if they can get to the second level, I think Marshawn Lynch could have a big day in this one, and that's going to have to happen, because I cannot see the Raiders winning this game via the air attack. It's going to have to come on the ground. I think they're going to have to mix things up, because Lynch is an inside runner. He always has been more primarily, but especially at this point in his career, he's not quite got that quick burst to get to the outside consistently these days. So I expect to see Jalen Richard come in for some of those plays, some of the passing type plays, to try and get some of those screens going, some quick passes, because they're going to have to utilise that aspect of the game with the quality of this Broncos pass rush. this interior is going to have to play well. I really think Lynch is going to be the key to this one. They're going to have to be able to try and tire these guys out, grind out some long drives, keep their defence off the field, because as I mentioned earlier, I really do not trust this Raiders defence against this group. So Lynch is going to be the absolute key, running up those A gaps. If they can get Pico moving backwards, I think these guys can get to the second level and have a lot of success against these linebackers, as well as Brandon Marshall is playing right now. On the outside, though, I think they've got some problems. Donald Penn has not started the season brilliantly, having come in a little overweight, and they've got problems at right tackle where I believe it's Austin Howard lined up at the moment. I'm pretty sure it is. Or is it Marshall Newhouse? Either way, not been getting great play from the right tackle spot. And Von Miller, I think, is going to have a lot of success in this one. He's also been getting some good support from Shaq Barrett on the opposite side. He's also playing pretty well. There was a lot of pressure coming from the outside against the Redskins. If they can't shore that up, I sense there being a lot of problems for this Raiders offense moving the ball once again. So I'm expecting a healthy dose of Lynch up the middle to try and establish something early in this game, because if they get off to a really slow start, they could end up behind the 8 ball, much like they did against the Skins, and I don't like their chances of passing their way out of trouble against this Broncos team. If they can pin their ears back, they'll win a lot of those matchups on the outside. Conversely, the defensive ends, they're going to be huge for the Broncos. If they can support DeMarco Pico, crush the A gaps, the B gaps, and force Lynch to bounce some plays and get the pursuit going, I can't see the Raiders running the ball too effectively. If that happens, I think the Broncos win this game comfortably. The Raiders are going to have to dominate the line of scrimmage. To do that, I think we may even see some fullback play in this one. I think we'll see more tight ends being utilised at the line of scrimmage. They've got to be able to just overwhelm this interior. If they can do that, then you force the Broncos perhaps to play a little bit further off the line of scrimmage with the corners, bring the safety up in run support, which if that happens, then I think they can have some success in those matchups. But I don't think they can afford to take too many chances, particularly as I don't feel Amari Cooper's really broke out quite yet. I think they need to get him some underneath catches to just try and get him going in this one. If they can do that, then maybe they can get some things going. But the tight end position is also going to be pretty important here. Got to get Kendricks into the game. It is Kendricks they've got lined up at tight end at the moment, isn't it? Jared Cook, of course. Wrong former Rams tight end. They've got to get Jared Cook involved. I think he's got the ability to get over the top of these linebackers. Where the safeties are utilised is going to be interesting. I think the Broncos have a lot of flexibility in how they're used. They could use them to double the receivers. I'm not sure that's going to be the case. Or they could use them to double up over the top of Cook, which I wouldn't be shocked to see if they can use some bracket coverage on him. I think it will really limit the options that the Raiders have. I think Carr has to go to the well that he went to last year and play an efficient short passing game in this one, spreading the ball all over the field. If he focuses on those 2-star wideouts that he's got, I think they're going to have a hard time in this one, winning this game. So the Raiders' game plan, I think, got to run the ball successfully, got to be able to get short, quick passes, because I don't trust these tackles at this point in time against this pass rush. And then they've got to just build from that. I think if they stick to that plan, they can have some success. I wouldn't want them to get too creative down the field in this one, even though it is something I have been screaming for this team to do. I'm not sure this is the game to try and do it. Go back to what they did effectively last year, and they may be able to come out of this one with a win. However, I like the Broncos' chances of just doing what they do. I think their front seven will be able to generate plenty of pass rush. I think they'll mix in blitzes I think they'll be focused on taking away that interior run. I'm expecting to see the nose tackle directly over the centre, the ends pretty much over the guards, and I think they'll trust them to clog up those interior lanes in the pursuit to get to the running backs. Whether the Raiders can manipulate that and maybe pop something to the outside or use some screens to try and manipulate that fact, I don't know. But that's how I see the Broncos doing it. I think the safeties will be sat pretty deep in this one, so the opportunities in the middle of the field will be there for the Raiders, which is why I think they've got to get that short game going. But I see the Broncos winning this one, particularly at home. I think both teams had a bit of a bad week last week, but I think this Broncos team is playing better on both sides of the ball. The Raiders haven't quite got going offensively, even though, other than that second half against the Jets, they were efficient in week 1. But last week was a bit of a mess, and I think maybe they'll force it a little, and that will result in some turnovers. I trust Trevor Siemian to get the win in this one, which sounds odd considering Carr is the superior quarterback, but I think Simeon's weapons will be able to have some success, and as a result, I think the Broncos end up with a more comfortable victory than people are expecting. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on this matchup. As always, let me know what you think. Got the comment section down below. The Cover Zero Facebook page. You can find me on Twitter at Simon Conboy. Always happy to talk football. And check out some more of the episodes. We've got plenty of game reviews, game previews going up all the time. Tuesdays we do the live Cover Zero roundtable. Me, Dan and Arnie. We cover every single game that occurred during the week, as well as some of the relevant news. And have some new bits coming up next week, so check those out as well. If you can like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon, it'll all be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. It really is appreciated. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. Have a great evening and go Bucks.